use this practice, and we'll talk a little bit more about it afterwards, is, again, I'll read from Attention Revolution on page 131, and he says the following. If you wish to continue in settling the mind in its natural state, so that was yesterday's practice, this practice can take you all the way to the achievement of Shamatha. But I shall now present an alternative practice that you may find an even more potent way to balance your attention to perfection. Padmasambhava calls this technique the cultivation of Shamatha without a sign. So of course Padmasambhava was the great Indian master from the 8th century who first brought Buddhism into Tibet. In this context, the term sign refers to any object of attention that can be identified within a conceptual framework. The tactile sensations of the breath are a sign. So is the space of the mind and the mental events that arise within that space. In both those practices, the attention is directed to an object other than itself, and stability and clarity are cultivated in relation to that object. In the practice of Shamatha without a sign, the attention is not directed to anything. It rests in its own nature, simply being aware of its own presence. Nominally, you could say that awareness takes itself as its object, but experientially, this practice is more a matter of taking no object. You simply let your awareness rest without any referent in its own innate luminosity and cognizance. And I'll talk a bit more about that later as well, that statement. While Padmasambhava presents this as a method for achieving Shamatha, it is also an effective method for illuminating the nature of awareness itself. And so this is, when he says it's an effective method for illuminating the nature of awareness itself, this is one of the great side benefits of this practice, is that simply through resting in awareness, we could intuitively come to an insight into the nature of our mind, which of course is Vipashyana practice. So this practice is particularly well known as a bridge into Vipashyana practice. But another great benefit, side benefit with this practice, is that by simply resting in awareness, what we see is that awareness is open and spacious. And simply by resting in that, that can provide us a very good basis for not getting caught up in our thoughts and emotions. And we saw that yesterday evening in a quote again from Attention Revolution when we were looking at those 9 stages. So I thought it'd be good to just read that again to remember what was said there last night. And he said, it's on page 99, he says, as the mind becomes more at ease, thoughts flicker like butterflies through the space of awareness, and you're able to passively witness the entire sequence of thoughts arising, playing themselves out, then vanishing. They seem to be less weighty in that they're less able to pull your attention after them. Like Einstein's theory that physical space is warped by the bodies of matter within it, it sometimes feels as if the space of awareness is warped by the contents of the mind. At times when we become fixated on something, our minds seem to become very small. Trivial issues loom up in our awareness as if they were very large and important. In reality, they haven't become large. Our minds have become small. The experienced magnitude of the contents of the mind is relative to the spaciousness of the mind. So to keep the activities of the mind in perspective, let the space of awareness remain as expansive as possible. In the meantime, the less you grasp onto mental events, the less the space of the mind contracts around them and is warped by them. So you may have found that yesterday actually, that we're trying to observe our thoughts and emotions, but we keep contracting around them and getting overwhelmed and getting caught up by them. And so what today's practice can do is it can provide us that open, spacious mind. And if we have that open, spacious mind, then like the analogy of the pebble in the cup and the pebble in the lake, then when things appear, with that open, spacious mind, it'll be much easier just to simply observe that without contracting around it and reacting to it. And so that's what we're going to go back to tomorrow, is on the basis of today's practice of creating that open, spacious awareness, then go back to observing what's happening in the mind and see whether we can be in that in a much better way than maybe yesterday. So this is another big benefit with this practice. So let's look at this practice in a little bit more detail before we go to the practice. So this is on page 144 of Attention Revolution. He says the following. Here are quintessential instructions by Padmasambhava on the practice of shamatha with no object apart from awareness itself. So now he's quoting a meditation text from Padmasambhava who says, vacantly direct your eyes in the space in front of you. So like yesterday's practice, in this practice it's also very much recommended to have the eyes open for the same reasons. Improves clarity, helps to keep us in the present moment better, we can be able to transition into daily life more easy, and also starts to break down that false sense of duality. And then he says, Padmasambhava says, see that thoughts pertaining to the past, future and present, as well as wholesome, unwholesome and ethically neutral thoughts, together with all the causes, assembly and dispersal of thoughts, are completely cut off. Completely cut off doesn't mean block. Cut off means not paying any attention to, not focusing on at all. Cut off. Just leave them there. Cut off, meaning not paying any attention to whatever is appearing. Bring no concepts to mind. Let the mind, like a cloudless sky, be clear, empty, and evenly devoid of grasping, and settle it into utter vacuity. By doing so, there arises the shamatha of joy, luminosity, and non-conceptuality. So there we see these three qualities that we saw in the quote from Jujum Limpa, and I'll talk about those later. So again, this practice is simply about knowing that we're aware, and to cut off whatever appears. Again, cut off doesn't mean block. Cut off means whatever's appearing, thoughts, emotions, sounds, sensations, let them be there, but we're not paying any attention to them at all. They can be there, that's fine. The only thing we're interested in is knowing that we're aware. That's it. That's the practice. Any questions about the practice before we go to the meditation?
If I like it a lot, right away I'm afraid it is attachment, but no, it is because it's unconditioned to be in this state in a way.
So if you like this practice, you are attached.
It's not attachment.
Yeah. So we have to, of course, distinguish between enthusiasm and attachment. If we don't have enthusiasm, then we won't put any energy into anything. So if we're enthusiastic about this practice, very good. But attachment will just agitate the mind. And so we need to let go of attachment, of course. Be enthusiastic and put effort into the practice and be happy with that. If we have craving and attachment, usually that craving and attachment comes with it is expectation or hope. I really hope that my mind will become completely still because all this stuff is tormenting me. So I want that. I need that. That's attachment. So if we just drop that altogether.
So in a way, the concentration on the breath or the mind was in a way a crouch.
What?
A crouch, like something to lean
Well, yes and no. I mean, in his book, he was saying that one recommendation that is useful is start with the breath because it's easier, then move to the mind, and then go to this practice. But you could use the breath all the way to Shamatha, you can use the mind all the way to Shamatha. But when we actually get to Shamatha, whether we use the breath, the mind, or awareness, it's the same experience. The mind has become completely still.
It seems to me that the instructions are quite the same. I mean, in the sense that when I'm focusing on the breath, I'm keeping everything away.
Well, you only focus on
I'm
the
not cut off from that. When I'm focusing on the mind, I'm cut off from the sensations such as the breath. And here I'm cut off from everything.
Yes, so what you notice is there's a sort of withdrawal. I mean, in the breath, we're withdrawing from all the other senses. In the mind, we're withdrawing from all the senses. And awareness, we're even withdrawing from that. So there's a sort of a withdrawal in that sense. But again, we shouldn't think, oh, therefore awareness is the best and I have to do that. No. I mean, for some people, breath is the best. For some, the mind is the best. For some others, awareness might be the best. So the best practice to do is the one that works best for you. So everyone's different. And that's what I find commonly, is that many people find the breath works the best. Some people find this awareness works the best. Some others really like the mind practice. Some others find a mental image of something works the best. So we just use the one that works best for us.
What is watching the mind? Is it another mind, or is it part of the same mind? I'm not asking who, because then you say
Well, if we go back to the quote, it says, that which observes is called mindfulness. So, of course, it's our mindfulness that is the faculty that is observing. But
mindfulness is a mind.
Well, no, mindfulness is a mental faculty in the mind. I mean, of course, you can say the mind is observing the mind, if you want to speak simply. If you want to be more precise, you can say mindfulness. But of course, in this practice, we're not trying to work out who's observing. That's Vipashyana territory. And we will be actually asking this question in Vipashyana in the second half of the retreat.
What's actually being aware is? Being aware, what is it? Because I'm trying to find like a comparison. Okay, I close my eyes now, and I'm aware that everyone is here.
Sorry, everyone?
I'm trying to understand what being aware is.
Being aware is knowing. Like, we look at this cup, we're aware of the cup, yeah? Explicitly. Explicitly, we're aware of the cup. Implicitly, we're aware of being aware of the cup. We're implicitly aware that I'm aware of the cup, aren't we? Implicitly. There's an agent who's aware of the cup. So all we're doing is we're making that explicit. Just knowing we're aware. So aware is just knowing.
So that's very weak.
It's very
weak. I can't feel it, this agent. You don't seem to be
feel
aware
the
of
agent.
it.
But
the thing that's aware of being aware.
yeah, but we're not trying to figure out who that is or where that is. That's all Vipashyana. All we're doing is just resting in that experience. That's all we're doing in this practice. We're not trying to figure out anything here.
Because that experience is really hardly there.
Hardly there. Are you conscious? There you go. That's it. You know you're conscious, yeah? You're not passed out. You know you're aware. You know you're conscious. That's it. That's all we got to do. Just stay in that experience of just knowing that you're conscious. That's it. And again, people go, nah, that can't be it. It's got to be more to it than that. That is it. That's it. Because the thing is that often people want to turn this into a thing. It's not a thing.
closest thing that comes to my mind is not being asleep.
Correct. So how do we know if we're doing this practice correctly? Are we caught up in some appearance? Are we focusing on an appearance? If we are, we're not in the practice. Have we passed out? We're not in the practice. Apart from that, we're in the practice. I mean, the quality of course, that needs work. I mean, there's a lot of quality because there could be some agitation and a little bit of dullness. But as long as we just know that we're conscious, we're not passed out, we're not focusing on any appearance, that's it. We're in the practice. And then just keep working on the quality of that.
I had a feeling like trying to balance myself on one leg.
Sorry, I can't hear what you're saying.
I felt as if I was trying to balance myself on one leg. Something that's the effort.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by trying to balance on one leg.
To lose
Lose it
yes.
in terms of getting caught up in something?
No, losing something that I'm used to.
Well, in fact, we can't lose it because it's always there. We can get distracted from it, but you can never lose awareness.
Not the word, but the events or the movements.
Yeah, so the challenge, of course, is to not get caught up in the movements. I mean, that's the big challenge in this practice because our strong habit is as soon as there's some movement, we get attracted to it. So that's the challenge, of course, and that just takes practice.
And I noticed that during the practice, if I heard a sound, I told myself, okay, I'm aware of the sound, and then I continued. Or when I found myself thinking, okay, I thought, okay, I'm thinking, not who is thinking then, I'm thinking. And then I said it's kind of doing when I'm supposed to not be doing, but I didn't get caught up not in the sound nor in the thinking. But
So that's a good question in terms of the progress in this practice. I mean, of course, if we have no experience, probably what will happen is some sound will come and we'll get caught up in it and we'll go, oh, that bird, that's a nice bird, oh, I don't like that bird, where's it coming, you know, all of that. Or something else comes up, a thought, and we get caught up. So to help getting swept away, then we can do this sort of labeling or noting, sound, thought. So already that's an improvement. But again, if we just continually come back to resting in awareness, and as we improve our ability to rest there, you'll find that the less and less these external things will pull us away. It's a little bit like if we're watching some program on TV at home and then the dog's barking next door, we often go, noisy dog, go away, go away. Or maybe like say we're reading a book and then we go, oh dog, shut up, be quiet. But if we're really like super focused in the book, often the dog will bark or someone's in the house talking to us and we go, did you say something? We don't even notice it because we're so there in there. So we're not trying to block. Of course, if you block, you're focusing outward. So just keep your attention there, and as you get better and better at resting in that experience, you'll find that these other things will have less pull on you.
then what is the difference between this practice and looking at the mind? Because when I'm aware of everything, senses and the mind, and in the mind it's only the mind, like that's the difference?
Well, and yesterday's practice, we're aware of the movements. We're focusing on the movements of the mind. In this practice, we're not interested in the movements.
What do you mean by movements?
Movements, thoughts, emotions, memories, images, anything that appears in the mind. So that was yesterday.
But it can appear also when I'm doing the awareness.
Correct, but in this practice, we're not paying attention to it. Yesterday, if there was a movement, we were watching it. In this practice, we're not watching it. It'll go there, but if you're really focusing on the awareness, there can be movements and you won't even notice them. You won't even notice them because you're so in the awareness. Like if you're absorbed in reading a good book, someone can be talking to you and you won't even hear them. I mean, the sound waves are hitting the eardrum, of course, but you don't notice them talking because you're so focused in this. But of course, initially that's not going to happen because we're not so focused on awareness. Some movement will come and we'll start to go with it. And then to help avoid in the short term, to help avoiding getting caught up, we can do, as you suggested, give it a name. Thinking, sound. So at least that can give us a little bit of, and then just come back to the awareness, come back to the awareness, come back to the awareness. And eventually, when we're very much in there, we can be fully present with that, and these things won't pull us at all. But that'll take time.
Would you say this is still a dualistic practice?
So the question is, would you say this is still dualistic practice? Experientially, this certainly does, I think, feel less dualistic than the breath and the mind. That in the breath practice there was really a sense of me being aware of the sensations of the breath, me being aware of thoughts and emotions. But here, particularly if we really get into this practice, this sense of being a distinct observer can really drop away. And that's why this practice, just this shamatha practice, can lead to an insight into the nature of mind, the insight into non-duality. Because there's not such a, because you're turning awareness in upon itself, so experientially there's not such a strong sense of being a separate observer. So, like if we use the analogy of the mind being like the sky, and yesterday the thoughts are like the clouds moving through the sky. So we were observing the sky and the thoughts yesterday. Today we're being the sky. So there's not such a strong sense of duality. And if we really get into the practice, that can really drop away to a point where we may come to an insight into emptiness simply by doing this, resting.
I find out that it's like being in the beat, or being in the beat, in the rhythm, when you are
being the, sorry?
beat.
The beat.
Yeah. When you are in it, you are in it. When you notice and you are looking at it, then the magic is gone. Then the rhythm is gone. So here comes the duality, because then you are watching yourself in it, and then it's disappeared.
That's why, in fact, in this practice, relaxation is so important. Because if we don't relax, then the sense of doing kicks in. Striving, pushing, doing. And then, so basically in this practice, the harder we try, the more difficult it becomes.
To rest.
Yeah, so if we try harder to rest, I mean, like when you get home, let's say you've had a busy day and you're exhausted, and you sit down on the couch, do you try to relax? Do you put a lot of effort in relaxing? You just stop, don't you? You just release. So similarly here, we just release doing. Don't try to relax. Because that's like getting home on the couch and going, I have to relax, I have to relax, I have to relax. I mean, it's not going to work, is it? The harder you try, the less you'll relax. So similarly here, the harder we try, the more difficult it becomes. And then we really pop into this dualistic mode. Because we're doing. So really just relax, relax, relax.
And then the dumbness comes.
But then we need to, of course, and I'll give more instructions in the next session about how to overcome that. Yeah. I need to do the practice there.
Being in awareness, you said that you get focused in it, like reading a book and being unaware of everything else. So that's a bit contradicting, no? I mean,
why is it contradicting?
Because the way I see it, if you are in awareness, then everything should be heightened. You're not necessarily supposed to be caught up by it, but you are in awareness, you are knowing everything. It's not like being distracted by
Right. So exactly. So if we practice this practice well, this is what's going to happen in daily life. Everything's going to be much more crystal clear. because we're going to be opening the awareness to also whatever appears. But here we're being selective. Just like with the breath, we're being selective. So we're being selective here so that in daily life, then everything will be much more crystal clear. And so that's going to be a big advantage.
So what are we selective of?
Just awareness, no movement. Awareness itself. That's the only thing we're being selective here in. Last question, then we need to start the practice.
Sorry for this question, I know this question, but I really don't understand the difference between this and noticing the mind, so...
So the question is, and I was going to answer that later, but I'll give a brief answer, we'll talk more in the next session. Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, so what's the difference specifically about resting in awareness and observing the space of the mind? What's the difference? Technically, no difference. Experientially, it feels a bit different. When I said observe the space of the mind, we probably have a sense of me observing this space, like me observing the sky. Whereas in this practice, it's more about being the sky. So resting in awareness, experientially, feels different, but it's more or less the same practice as observing the space of the mind.
So how do I achieve this changing perspective?
You achieve it by not doing, by being. Again, the thing is, this is why people find it difficult, because it's too simple. Our conceptual mind wants to work it out, what am I supposed to do? Doing is the problem, so just stop doing. So we're overcomplicating things. So it's just about knowing, like the question here, it's simply just, am I conscious? Just stay in that experience of being conscious. That's it. That's all we're doing. Nothing more.
So if thoughts arise,
ignore them. Don't try and block them, but don't focus on them.
Okay.
Just ignore them. They can be there. Let them be there. We're just not interested in them. So let's do the practice. Setting the mind into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. And relaxing more deeply with each out-breath. Allowing the breathing to flow naturally and effortlessly.